joining me. Today I am speaking with Monica Smit. She is the Managing Director of the Reignite Democracy Australia movement, which is a grassroots movement was created in response to the Victorian government's response to the COVID pandemic. Prior to establishing the RDA, Monica worked as an independent journalist, traveling overseas and following global issues. So Monica, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Just to start off, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself and how you ended up getting into politics and founding the IDA?
Sure. Well, like many people, we don't get involved in politics until it really affects us. And I think that's probably why we're in this position where we're trying to backtrack and, preserve our country's freedoms and liberties, not knowing that they were actually being taken away from us. So one good thing that the COVID pandemic showed Australians is that our government does have far too much control, and they have been putting in legislation for decades that actually limit our liberties and freedoms. So basically during the lockdowns, I just felt like something was off, and I had gotten a lot of experience when I was traveling with my camera and interviews and things like that, that I used that sort of knowledge that I had gained from all those experiences to create a grassroots movement here in Australia. I obviously had no idea what it would become or how it would affect me and the impact that it could have, and obviously the positive influence it's had on so many people's lives. I didn't expect that. I just really just started talking online, and I started hosting some online events and speaking how I felt, and people resonated with that. And that was the beginning of Reignite Democracy Australia. And 2 years later, it's one of the most influential alternative sort of grassroots movements, as well as a source of information for Australians to keep up to date without having the skew of the mainstream media, which always seems to be peddling the same narrative. We pretty much go against that narrative, which I think is more the truth. So yeah, Australians really turn to Reignite Democracy Australia for that. And now that there is a federal election coming up, our mission is to empower Australians by bringing their voices together. And I think having a big input into the election is really a natural progression for Reignite Democracy Australia. And that's what we're doing. So we have thousands of volunteers around the country. Reignite Democracy is nonpartisan as an entity, as an organisation. So we're actually helping several different freedom parties and candidates across the country with our volunteering and also our online promotion as well.
Mm-hmm. You made some headlines not that long ago about actually getting arrested by the police. One of the charges was, I think, officially they were saying that you were inciting opposition to the I suppose the policies of the Victorian State Government. Can you please go into a little bit exactly what happened and what was your experience?
Sure. So the actual charge is incitement, which is supposed to be used for things like if I was to encourage you to commit an armed robbery or a murder or something like that, I'm also culpable for that crime because I would have encouraged you to do so. But in this situation, it seems like there's a loophole in the Crimes Act, because even if found guilty, I was inciting people to commit an offence that is only punishable by a fine. So it doesn't even carry a jail term. However, the incitement charge itself is a criminal conviction, even though the punishment for the crime I was allegedly inciting is only a fine. So really, it's kind of like you encouraging someone to park in a no parking zone and getting a criminal charge for doing so. That's how ridiculous it is. And then they gave me bail conditions. If I was to sign, I would have gotten out straight away after one night in remand. And those bail conditions were so over the top, I just couldn't sign them. They wanted me to stay at home from 7 p.m. to 6 a.m. every day until my trial, which is going to be 2 years away. They wanted me to delete everything on the RDA website that incited opposition to the COVID restrictions. So they actually took a leap further than the charges themselves and said that I wasn't even allowed to voice opposition to the government, which is really, quite communistic in nature. And I would have had to, all my staff would have been, I have had 7 staff at the time, they would have basically lost their jobs, and Reignite Democracy would have ceased to be an influence in this area. So I couldn't sign those bail conditions because of those reasons. And there's worse ones in there too, but I won't go on. But because I refused to sign the bail conditions, I was then put into prison for 22 days in solitary confinement because I didn't want to take a PCR test. And then we appealed the bail conditions, and we got all of those terrible ones taken away. So now I'm able to do my work again. So really those 22 days were worth every single second. And on top of that, I'm trying to set a precedent so that other people don't go through what I went through, because there's clearly a problem in the Crimes Act, and it needs to be rectified. And that's why I'm fighting it till the end, because I really don't think that people like me should be criminally convicted for allegedly hosting or encouraging people to attend a gathering, which should be an inalienable human right given to us by God, not by the government. So that is why I'm fighting it, and that's where we're at.
Yeah, when I first heard about that, it was quite chilling, the shift in the Australian excuse me, in the Australian thinking, where the police could now actually shut down essentially a political opposition to a government, or at least try to. I mean, this is something. Excuse me. This is something new in Australia. I don't think we ever really did this before. Actually, I think during the 50s or 60s, we had the referendum and the Menzies during the Cold War, to ban the Communist Party. And, being a liberal, open society at the time, the Australians rejected such a measure. But it was proposed and rejected. Now we've got the actual government, the police, all basically going in that authoritarian direction. And on top of all that, with Victoria, Australia was one of the most draconian reactions in the world when it came to the COVID outbreak. But Victoria in particular was particularly nasty. Why do you think Victoria was particularly bad compared to the rest of the country?
Well, unfortunately, the states seemed to have acted quite independently of each other. And so it really came down to the premier of the state as to how things were run. Scott Morrison, the Prime Minister, seemed to have no control over the states and the premiers, or at least he didn't try to. He could have, but he didn't. And Daniel Andrews he's a dictator. He's a tyrant. He's a narcissist. And he's also very closely tied with China and the Communist Party. He's had allegedly over 40 visits to China in a short period of time. And as well, he was trying to do business with China with the Belt and Road Initiative, which would have sold off our ports and bridges and some of our roads to China, basically. And Scott Morrison actually had something to say about that. He stopped that. So he does have some power there. But I just think Daniel Andrews, he's a unique fella. And I would go as far as to say that he's evil. And I think he got off on the control aspect of how easily he could control every single person's lives. I mean, you organize a birthday party on a Saturday, and let's say it's a Wednesday. In the back of your mind, you really have no idea if that party was going to go ahead, because at a drop of a hat, Daniel Andrews would change everything, and you would have to change your life around that within a matter of hours. Valentine's Day was cancelled the day before. restaurants had bought, copious amounts of food and supplies, and it all went to waste just because Daniel Andrews woke up on the wrong side of the bed and decided to do that. So I think it has to do with him primarily. And things like closing children's playgrounds outside when children have no really risk of this disease, and it wasn't proven to be scientifically effective to close outdoor playgrounds. And these poor children were already not going to school or classes or, karate or anything like that. They were totally isolated from their friends and communities. And then on top of that, they couldn't even go outside to play on the playground. These sorts of measures, I think, are very evil and just a power play. So I think that's why Victoria was the worst, because of Daniel Andrews.
Mm-hmm. And what's your perception of the general population? Because when the protests started to happen across the country, even though it was great to see and there was plenty of people that turned out, I noticed there was quite a lot of everyday people actually condemning it and actually completely on the side of the authorities, actually demanded even harsher measures. Do you think that's still the case? Do you think it's starting to wane? Are people starting to wake up? Or what's your perception of, I suppose, the everyday Australians?
Well, the mainstream media play a huge role in the middle Australians' perception of anything, really. So without the mainstream media, none of this would have been possible for Daniel Andrews to control people's fear and thoughts and things like that. So because we were so vilified in the mainstream media, everyday Australians had to kind of condemn us because they didn't want to be named the same things that we were being named. They didn't want to be associated with us, and even if they were against vaccine mandates, they were scared to voice that because then they would be called one of us, So it was a very clever play. But the thing is that in one of the protests, there was 700,000 Victorians on the street. Now, there are only 4 million voters in Victoria, which means about 4 million adults, more or less. So 700,000 is almost a quarter of the entire Victorian population. And for every one person protesting, there has to at least be 1 or 2 people at home that agree with them that couldn't go. So I actually think majority of Victorians are sick of this government. Whether they agreed with some of the health measures or not is beside the point. They do want change. And I think that's what we're going to find out, because in Victoria, we have an election in November. And of course, we have the federal election coming up in 4 weeks. So we're going to find out what the real thoughts are, because there is no one else in that polling booth with you except for yourself. The mainstream media can't tell you who to vote for, although they're going to try. But, it'll be interesting to see.
Turning towards the actual election, just to clarify, your movement, Reignite Democracy Australia, is that a movement or is it a party?
It's a movement. We did dabble in creating a party about a year ago, but there were already so many other great alternative minor parties that we decided to pull out of that race. Mm-hmm. And we think that I feel that Reignite Democracy is most powerful as a non-partisan sort of lobby group who helps parties who are focused on being a party. I try to do everything, but you really can't do everything effectively. So I'm going to try and leave the party side of things to the experts and just support the ones that I think deserve supporting. And the feeling from my audience is that that is the right way to go for us. And in fact, we aren't actually allowed to promote just one party, because the Australian Electoral Commission came after me when I was sort of starting to do that. So we've really found our place now, helping out as many freedom parties and candidates as possible, which is what's happening now.
Mm-hmm. And having said that, you're running yourself for a seat. Is that the federal election or the upcoming state?
Yeah, so it is the federal election, and I'm running as an independent underneath my fiance. So we are an independent group, basically. And so we're not aligned with any party, and we're doing everything ourselves. And myself and him have been doing activism for a long time together. So it just makes sense that I would support him in doing that. But it doesn't change RDA's non-partisan position, because an independent is in theory non-partisan because they're not attached to a party anyway. So.
Mhm. And with the election, what's your perception? Do you think will one of the three major freedom parties, UAP, One Nation, and Liberal Democrats, do you think they're heading for a breakthrough movement and actually enter in Parliament at the federal and/or state level?
I think it would be naive to expect that one of these parties can take over the government and have the prime minister position.
No. I wasn't saying that.
Yes. Okay, good. But what I do think could very well happen, and actually it's seeming like it will happen, especially with all the work that everyone is doing around the country, is if one of the major parties doesn't have majority government, then it will be what is called a hung parliament, which means that they would need to harness support from the independents or the minor party upper house candidates to actually be able to pass any legislation. So if that happens, it could mean that the government will basically stall, and it won't be able to put through any legislation, whether it's good or bad. Now, that would be bad in terms of getting good things done, but I think it's a great sort of risk management, situation where I think this government would be better off not being able to do anything than being able to make things even worse, because that's all they've been doing in the last 3 years, is making things worse. So if they're cut off at the knees and nothing can be passed, that would be a really good solution to our problems right now. And secondly, it'll then we'll have another 3 years to work on the strategy for the next federal election. And maybe over 2 or 3 elections, we can have a new majority government. And I think that would be a realistic goal.
Mhm. Well, it seems to be very similar to what happened with Abbott and Gillard back in 2010-ish, I
Yep.
believe, where it became the first time parliament since the 1940s, and it all came down to 3 independents to pick the government. And I think around that same period, the Senate was this mix of third-party candidates, and that really, I remember a lot of people initially had a problem with it. They're going, "Oh, we can't get nothing done. It's what a mess. They should go for re-election and fix it up." But I remember even arguing even back then, well, it's the people voted this way. It's your job as a government to make it work. You make it work and stop complaining, and that's it. And being a third party, it isn't so much you go on cruise control. You don't just rubber stamp or hinder legislation. You're your own entity, and it can go either way. And therefore, the main parties and media have to actually work harder to actually get something done, and not just go on cruise control themselves.
Yeah.
I think we still got a bit of time left. I think 15 minutes or so. Having said that, are there any particular figures or parties that you can think of that people should pay particular attention to?
Well, there are quite a few options. So there's obviously One Nation, Pauline Hanson's One Nation, there's Liberal Democrats, there's UAP, and there's Australia Federation Party. Now, they've all pretty much preferenced each other. So, if you vote for all of them before the majors, then hopefully, there'll be 1 or 2 senators in each state that can get into the federal parliament. And there are also independent groups running as well. Now, the best thing is about this election is that people have come together to create resources so that voters don't have to do all their own research. It's all actually being done for them. So RDA has conducted a survey, and candidates are filling in that survey, and we are promoting it on our website so that voters can go in and decide who they want to vote for. Also, there's a new website called majorslast.com. And what that does is it asks you two very simple questions. Who's your favorite minor party, and which major party did you vote for last time? And it actually spits out a how to vote card for you. And you can move the parties around to your pleasure, but you cannot move the major parties above the last 3 spots. So it is designed to put the majors last. These types of resources have never been available before, and never before have Australians been so had such a vested interest in making sure their vote counts. There's so many volunteers, and so like if you have 10 friends who agree with you but don't have the time to do the research, you can look up their electorate and make their how to vote card for them and send it straight to their phone and say, hey, don't talk to anyone on polling day, just go straight to the booth. You're my friend, you trust me, I've done the research, here you go. And this is the biggest barrier that we've had before, is that Australians didn't care enough about who they were voting for. So they would go on the day, pick the first how to vote card that was shoved in their face, and they would just go vote that way. But that's not going to be the case. People are going to be prepared before they even go there. And RDA is going to have non-partisan volunteers at the polling booths to help people decide who they want to vote for. And I don't think that's ever happened either. So it's really all bets are off on this election. It's all going to change because knowledge is power, and we've never been so knowledgeable about the election in history. So who knows what could happen?
I would add also angry. I don't think the Australian people have been as angry as they have been at the establishment.
That's right.
Because I think Australians been very trusting.
Yes.
Very, it can't happen here type of mentality.
Yep.
And it finally did, and I think a lot of them maybe even in denial. They don't like to admit it.
No.
But I think the more they push, the more people wake up.
Yeah.
So in a way, in the long term, maybe even a good thing.
Oh, it has to be a good thing. I think good always comes out of bad if you use it to your advantage. And anger can be used in a really productive way. Righteous anger is totally okay. And that's what we're doing. We're harnessing the anger and we're putting it into action. And that's what people love. Instead of just being depressed about it, do something about it. We're already hitting the streets and talking to random people. And the sentiment out there, at least 80% of the people I spoke to at a busy area in Melbourne, all agreed to put the majors last. So I don't know. I think it's going to backfire on them. It has to, because good always prevails in the end. I just hope the end is coming close.
The end is near,
yeah.
Okay, well, Rodney, if you could please tell us if you have any, where can people find you, any contact social media accounts?
Sure. Well, reignitedemocracyaustralia.com.au. That's the website. That's where everything happens, really, because Facebook has totally banned everything that I can possibly try to do on there. We still have Instagram, same name. We have Telegram. We have Twitter. And the Majors Last app is majorslast.com. So right now it's not ready yet, but you can put your email address in there so that when it is live, you'll get a notification that it has gone live. Of course, all the candidates aren't announced yet, so it's impossible for it to be ready. But yeah, you can find me at all of those places. But really the best thing to do is subscribe on the website. I send out regular mass emails and you can read them or discard them and read them whenever you feel like it. But yeah, that's really where I have all my information.
Okay, well, thank you very much for joining me, and hopefully we can talk again soon.
Thank you so much for your time.